Everybody, Diana here from Heartfelt Creative. Welcome to another episode of Patches and Pieces Monday. Thanks so much for joining me. I have a fun little block for us today. It's called the Tulip Ladyfinger block. It's actually a pretty old traditional block. I went and did a little search for some information on it, and I found an article from a newspaper. Oh, it was in the Ladies Art Company catalog in 1939. A woman, I don't know if this is the woman that designed it or if this is the woman writing the article, I think is the case, named Nancy Page. She encouraged quilters to buy their instructions for the block. So I'm gonna flip the camera actually and show you. So here's the block. I'm going to bring this down because there's something I want you to see. So in this is a picture from the article of the original block. And so I get the tulip bit, right? I get that, no problem. I don't get the idea of the ladyfinger. So when I think of ladyfingers, I think of tiramisu and dessert. So what I did is I looked up tulips, and I didn't find a ladyfinger tulip, but I did find a ladyfinger flower that could look like a tulip a little bit. And so I'm thinking maybe somebody saw that flower and thought it was a tulip. But the way we're going to be doing this is we're going to be having a half square triangle here and a half square triangle here. Let me get my little pokey tool like it. So in ours, we're going to have a half square triangle here and a half square triangle here. But on this one, it looks like she did a half square triangle, a square, and then she did a rectangle with a snowball corner. That's what that looks like to me when I look at it. And then she had some longer rectangles here around this. So ours is going to be put together a tiny bit different because ours is made entirely with squares. Let me flip that one more time. So the one we're going to make today is entirely of squares, but I just thought it would be interesting to see where that came from, because quilt patterns way back in the day were found a lot in ladies' magazines and newspapers and things like that. In fact, my grandmother used to have all of her patterns that she would get that she didn't like create out of her mind, what were like newsprint kind of things, and she got them from like Ladies' Companion and that kind of little town magazine that would come out, that type of thing. So, and actually in this article, it goes on to show there's an actual copy of the article. I always find that interesting, like where did this block come from? And who created it, who made it. So this came out of this article came to me from the Pennsylvania Peacemaker. And it was just published in February of this year. So this is a pretty new article, but I thought maybe you'd be interested in that. So in the description, there is a link to it's technically a photo, but you can download it and print it out as a piece of paper, because basically what it's showing you is all the different fabric pieces, like fabric A, B, and C. You're going to need 3 fabrics, and with each a size of the square, what size that is, it'll say something like this says 1-4.5 SQ. So that means, let me hold this closer. So this means 1 square, 4.5 inches square. That's what that means. So on this one, you can see in fabric C, you're going to need 4 that are 2.5 inches square. And so there's also one like that for A. There's another one for B, and there's one more for the C fabric. So you'll see that. So that link is here in the description. So you'll want to grab that so that you can see your sizes and what you need to cut out, but you're only going to need the 3 fabrics. And this is a really beginner friendly block I found. Now, I think the way it was made originally Some beginners might have found a little more challenging with the rectangles, but because we're doing, I've got my cookie tool in my hand, I'm doing it like a baton. But because we're only using squares today and half square triangles and squares, that's all this is. So it's pretty simple. And I think you will have an easy time with it if you're a beginner. If you need more information than what I give you, if you need like a handout to help you with half square triangles, there's also a link in the description to my handout for how to make a half square triangle as well. Okay, so I think that will be helpful for everybody. There's one, I would say, one specialty tool. Of course, we're going to use our rotary cutter. We're going to use our regular template rulers for cutting. There's one other tool that I'm going to use, and it is for making the half square triangles, but you do not need it. And I'll show you what you can do without it. But I use this little, it's called a magic wand. I found out. I've always just called them half square triangle rulers, but somebody said, oh no, they're called magic wands. I'm like, oh, well, I kind of like that because I actually have a longer one over here. So that really could be like a wand, couldn't it? I don't think I'd get on very well with Harry Potter. I'm not a good flicker there. But I have a couple of sizes. So I have this really long one, so I could do really big half square triangles with that one. And then I have one that's this size, and this size is just a little bit smaller. And I even have one that's only about 4 inches too. Lots of companies make them. I have them from Fons and Porter and OmniGrid and Creative Grids and other folks. So you don't need them, but I'm going to show you how to use it because it makes making your half square triangles super simple. And we like simple, right? So I am going to start us out with making our half square triangles. And with that, we're going to take our 4 3-inch square B blocks, which for me is this plaid or plaid, I guess. Yeah, it's a plaid. And we're going to need our 4 3-inch square C blocks. Okay, so I'm going to flip the camera again and we're going to get started. Okay, so here is our C block, and here is our, let me put this camera back up so you can see it better there. There we go. Hang on, I'm just trying to move my, I don't want my iron to go on the floor, but I just kind of want to put these like this. Got it. All right, so this is our C block and this is our B block, and we're going to lay them with the darker block, which should be the B block, on top, right sides together. Okay, and then I'm gonna actually flip it over so that the lighter one is on top. When you use this little magic wand tool, super, super simple. You just line it up there in the corner, and you line it up on this diagonal corner, and there's a line there, so you can lay it right on your corners. And you take a pencil or whatever marking instrument you want to use, and you make a line down each side of it. And those are the actual lines that you're going to sew on. See, we have a line on each side. Let me hold this up a little bit better. There we go. We have a line on each side. But if you don't have one of these, so I just go and I sew on these and I'm done. But if you don't have a magic wand, all you need to do is with a regular ruler is draw a line from diagonal point to diagonal point. And then when you go to your sewing machine, you stitch a 1/4 inch to the right and a 1/4 inch to the left of that center line. So the center line that you draw here is the mark that you go from for your 1/4 inch on each side. What I've done here with my magic wand is I've actually drawn those 2 1/4 inch lines. Alrighty, super duper simple. Alrighty, so I'm gonna flip the camera over to the sewing machine. We're gonna go over and we're gonna sew this. And with each of these 2 squares, you're going to end up making 2 half square triangles. So very easy. And it goes fast because instead of making, we need 8 half square triangles. So instead of making 8, we're only going to have to sew 4 sets. And then when we cut them apart, we will have 8 half square triangles. So I'm just sewing down my first line. Now here's a little trick I learned from the one and only Jenny Doan. I've been doing these for years and I just would always cut my thread and come back around. She doesn't cut her thread. She just pulls it a little bit. That might be even a little more than I needed to. And then come around and stitch down the other side. You do end up using far less thread in that respect. Because normally I have just a tiny piece of thread. I pulled that a little far out, but it keeps you from having to cut thread each, after each pass and all of that. So let me just clip this last thread. We'll go back around and we'll come back to our overhead camera. One more. There we go. So now we're back to our overhead camera and we have our sewn line. Now I've sewn here and I've sewn here. So now I'm just going to take and that on the cutting board and we'll line this up from diagonal to diagonal. Take my rotary cutter. Now, if you've made half square triangles before, none of this is new to you, but I like to do it as if nobody has ever done it before. That way, if you're new, you'll know. And now I've cut those apart and now I have 2 half square triangles. So we're going to bring in our pressing mat and we're going to press these to the dark side so that they don't shadow through on that white fabric. I'm gonna condition my seam with my precision piecing pen like I like to do. If you've seen any of my other videos where I make half square triangles and all, you know I love that pen. Okay, so press that, put my clapper on it. You can watch my Good Gadget video. I think it's the very first episode of my Good Gadget series here on YouTube. I'll show you exactly what this Taylor's clapper is all about. It absorbs the heat and really allows your blocks to dry a little quicker, absorbs the heat and really sets those seams. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off my little dog ears. And if you're new to piecing, these are your little dog ears, okay? And I just clip them. Sometimes you don't really need to clip them, but when they're pretty good size like this, I get rid of them. If they're tiny, I don't because they just sew into the seams. This would add a little more bulk than I'd like. Okay, so get rid of those. Alrighty, let me slide this back over. Oh. All right, so now we have all of I had pre-made our other quarter or half square triangles. So I have my whole pack of 8 half square triangles. Now, and they're going to be roughly at this point 2.5 inches, well, they will be 2.5 inches square. Okay, so now if you'll notice in your on the picture with the instructions for cutting, it shows that you needed 4 2.5-inch squares of A and 4 2.5-inch squares of C. And the reason we need those is because now we're going to make some 4-patch blocks. So again, very simple, basic block to make. We're going to be making it with this square and our half square triangles. So the first thing I want to do is take 2 half square triangles and kiss the 2 B sides or the dark sides together, right like that. So lower left and upper right squares. Then I want to take my A square, place it right there, and place my C square right there. So upper left is your C square, then your half square triangle. Lower right is your A square, and then your lower left is your other half square triangle. And we're going to do that 4 times, okay? So what I'm going to do now is fold these over, and I'm going to put a little clip, not really to hold them together, but so I know when I go over to my sewing machine what edge I'm sewing down, because I'll be doggoned if I don't always end up sewing down the wrong edge. So that's one set, and I'm going to set them aside. And I'm going to take two more, put them together. Oops, almost did that one wrong. And there's my second one. So all I do is I fold them over so that I can basically chain piece these now. But if I don't mark which edge I sew down, by the time I get it to my machine, I'll be sewing down on the wrong edge, and then I'll have to get out the seam ripper. I don't want to do that. I don't. All right, so we're going to do our third setup here. Oops. There we go. You can see on this one, I forgot to trim off my salvage, but that's okay. I'm not worried about that. I have a block here that's not quite the right size, it seems. That part is. This one might need to be, yeah, this needs to be trimmed up just a little bit. Give me just a sec. It's just a wee bit trimmed off that edge there. There we go. Let's see if that's this side. Yep, this one needs it too. Sometimes that happens, so trim that up. And now these should go together better. All right, so this was like this, and this was like this. Okay. Again, I wanted to make sure I had them going in the right directions. Okay. So now I have 3 sets of my 4 patches set up, and I'm going to set up my final one. There we go. Okie dokie. Okay, so now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 patch blocks set up to sew. So I'm going to flip the camera, and we will take these over to the machine, and we will chain piece these. I don't chain piece a lot when I sew by myself, but it's easier to do that when I'm sewing for you all. All right, just lining everything up, lining up my 1/4 inch. So if you're new, chain piecing is just continued stitching without breaking your thread, basically. Lift my foot, line up my 1/4 inch again. So you can see I'm making sure that I take my clip off once I get it here to the machine. And I will square these up when I'm done. And the one, if you want to call it a rule, the one saying I always remember, if you square up one block, you need to square up all of your blocks, just to make sure. So when I finish with all of these, I will certainly get them all sewn together into their 4 patches. I will definitely go through and square them up with a square up ruler. We're almost done here, because I know for some reason I cut a few of these a little large, but we're making them work. Four patches is really a very simple block. It's just 4 squares sewn together. But in our case, the 4th square is actually a 1/2 square triangle. All right. Now I can trim there. And trim there. And we'll trim the rest of these over at the cutting table. Flip the camera. Okay, so that's all of our half square triangles chain pieced together. So now when I clip them apart, right between, so I know every two is a set, I'm going to set those two sets together. Because we'll press these open and then, oh, that one's really close. We'll press these open and then we can finish sewing the 4 patches. So I have 4 sets just like before. I am going to go ahead and press these open and then we'll set up to finish the 4 patches. Be right back. So I've gone ahead and I've put together 3 of my 4 patches. So that's what our 4 patch is going to look like. And they're going to square up to 4.5 inches, but I've left one so that I can show you. So I have my two patch pieces that we made before. Let me flip the camera. And so we have it set up like it's supposed to look, right? That's the way it was supposed to look. Now we're going to fold the top down over the bottom and we're going to line up our seams right there in the center. And I love these double-headed pins. Can you see that? You put 1 pin on each side of the seam and that is going to hold your seam right in place. Now you're going to take that out. You're not going to sew over it, but right when you get to there, then you pull it out and your seam just stays so nicely in place right there. So let's take this over to the sewing machine and do this 1 4 patch together. Okay, so we're all lined up here, set. There we go. And now I'm really close to my pin, so I'm just going to slide it out and then I'm going to keep going. Now, I wish that I had thought of using those pins, but I wasn't. Those pins are from Lori Holt. And I will say that I've used those pins before in my way past life. For something in merchandising back when I was in college. We used them for something. I still can't remember what it was, but Lori Holt uses them for holding your seams together and they work perfectly. I mean, I'm a complete and total believer in the Wonder Clip all day long because I don't like to use pins a lot. In fact, I rarely ever use them, but I started using those double pins for just to give them a try because again, they're in one of my Good Gadgets episodes. I reviewed them and I love them. So here, let's flip the camera one more time. And so now we have our 4 patch ready. I'm just gonna set my seam and condition it with my precision pen. And I'm actually gonna flip it from this side. And I'm gonna press it open. I am pressing my seams to the side, to the dark side. I am not opening my seams. Whether you press open or close, there's always a big discussion about that every single time if you bring it up. And there we go. And this one is pretty well, yeah, that needs very tiny little bit of trim. Very, very tiny. We're talking dust. Actually, that side's good. And it's this side. It's got a very tiny little bit. So the whole idea about do I press open, do I press to the side? Well, in the end, it is completely your choice. there are reasons people give for pressing open, and I get those, reducing bulk in seams and that sort of thing. If you press open, would you do me a favor and use a shorter stitch length, like a 1.8 even, because you are going to get, scientifically, as a scientist, I will tell you, you're going to get a slightly weaker seam, or you're going to get batting popping through. There's lots of reasons not to do your seams open, but some people do them all the time and they love it. But I know the one thing to cure those problems with open seams, pressing them open, is to use a shorter stitch length. Otherwise, I always, to this day, all of my seams are pressed to the side every single time. The bulk, a little bit of bulk here and there even doesn't bother me. So, but that's completely up to you. That is completely your preference. Don't let anybody ever tell you that you have to do it one certain way or it's wrong, because that's not true. Okay. All righty. So now we are set up. And so the only squares we have left are our 4.5-inch C squares and our 4.5-inch A square. So I'm going to flip the camera one more time and we're going to do the final layout of this block, because now we're down to the final bit. All right, that's our A block. This is the center. Let's see. Let's make sure we can get this in here properly. There we go. Perfect. So that's our A block. Now, all of our little blocks that we made are going to go at the corners so that our A fabric is kissing on the corners. And there's our last one. Oh, so you can already see. Now we're going to take our final C squares. And those are going to go in the center on all 4 sides. Oops, I can't get these two apart. Okay, there we go. There's that C square and that C square. And that is the layout, the final layout for our block. So simple, because all you're going to do now is you're going to fold this one over, 1/4-inch seam. Fold this one over. Let's make sure you can see that. This one over, 1/4-inch seam. And then you're going to have your bottom row. You're going to do that again in your middle row and again in your top row. And once you have all 3 blocks in each row sewn together, then just like we did when we were making our 4 patches, we're going to flip this row onto this row and do a 1/4-inch seam, and this row onto this row and do a 1/4-inch seam. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've sewn my 3 rows together. So you can see those. Now, the only thing that we have to do is to put this row on here and this row on here, and we're done. And I thought we'd do those together so that you could see, because on each one of these, we do have 2 seams to line up. And sometimes I know people like to see seams getting lined up. So I'm going to get out my little box of pins, because the ones I've used are all over on the pin cushion by the sewing machine. So as I use them, if they're over on the sewing machine, I just put a few more from the box in my other pin cushion, and then I eventually bring them all back over and put them back in that main pin cushion. Okay, so I'm going to take my center row and I'm going to flip it right on top of my bottom row. And so I need to line up this seam and this seam with the seam right underneath it. So on my magnifiers there, so I can see well. Yep, they're right on top of each other. I'm going to take one of my little handy dandy double pins here, and I'm going to put one pin on each side of the seam to go through. This one's a little tight. This one's a little weird, but it'll still work. That's perfect. Now I'm going to do the same thing over here on this side. I'm gonna line up my seams. There we go. I'm going to take my double-headed pin. There we go. All right, now I'm going to go sew this a 1/4 inch all the way down that line. I'll flip the camera over. All righty. Here we go. I've been trying new 1/4 inch feet for my piecing. And believe it or not, I'm starting to really love using my walking foot. That's not this foot. This foot, although it has always worked and still is working just fine, sometimes I find it's starting to slip a little bit. I just find that I get my stuff lined up better and my 1/4 inch is more stable, even on just two pieces of fabric. If I do it with my walking foot. So you might be seeing me do it more with my walking foot in the near future, because I like that. And then the walking foot's on there if I have anything else that I have to do. Okay, so let's flip the camera one more time. Now we're going to bring in this and press this open. Oh yeah, I love how those line up, those seams line up. I always check. Let's get this up here so you can see. Oops, here. There we go. There you go. Helps if you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just setting my seam. Now I'm going to flip this open. Look at how nicely those points. I love that. Now, I've been doing this for a long time, so my points are not usually very bad, but I've noticed that since I've been using these pins, holy moly, they have just turned out to be almost just, I think maybe I've had to redo one since I started using them, so I love them. All right, so now we've got the bottom row and the center row together. We're going to bring in our top row that we've pieced and flip it onto our center row. And we're going to, once again, line up these seams here and here. And I'm going to start calling these the magic pins because they are like magic. I love them. All right. That one's lined up. Now let's line up another. And one pin on each side of the seam. I know you guys can hardly see that when I'm doing it, but there's not really a way to show you that very easily. All right, so I'm all lined up. Now we're going to flip the camera and we're going to go sew this seam, same as the other, 1/4 inch. Standard piecing seams are 1/4 inch, guys, if you're new to quilting. If you're not, you know that. Sometimes if your directions tell you to use a different seam allowance, then you should follow that instruction because there's a reason for it. The person who put that quilt together used a different seam allowance for a specific reason. And if you get off from that seam allowance, you could end up being off on your quilt and it might not come together properly. Now, all of that said, if you are new to quilting, please don't beat yourself up if your seams aren't perfect every time. Just practice and get used to it as you go. Yes, you're going to end up unpicking occasionally. That's okay. We've all done that. We've all been there. That's why every one of us has more than one seam ripper. I'm embarrassed to tell you how many I have. Like maybe a dozen. I mean, seriously. And I keep them everywhere. So don't be worried about your seams not being exactly a 1/4 inch when you're first starting out. Do the best you can, knowing that if your seam's a little larger, your piece is going to be a little smaller because you're taking up more space in that seam. If your seams are a little narrower, your piece might be a tiny bit bigger, but you know, in the end, it's nothing to get yourself super upset over. So I'm not going to flip. I'm just going to show you that I've got that on there, and I'm going to show it to you when I'm done. I'm just going to press it real quick. So I will tell you just a couple of more things. My stitch length for this entire piece was 2.5. It's kind of the standard one that I use a lot. If I'm doing something around a curve, I will make my stitch length shorter, like a 2 or a 1.8. I used a Aurifil number, is it 26? No, it's 2600 Dove Gray thread. That's the standard thread that I piece with. This is a 50 weight. It also comes in a 40 weight. You can use either, no problem. I just like this light Dove Gray. It kind of disappears into all the fabric. I don't have to worry about it. Sometimes white really shines up through some things that I don't really care for. And I don't like to use my pretty color thread in my piecing. I like to save that for my quilting. So I use a gray 26. Aurifil is a really low fuzzy thread. Cotton thread just tends to give lint, right? Because it's a natural fiber. Aurifil is a really low lint thread. It's an Italian thread. It's beautifully made. I really love it. It's my standard thread that I use all the time. You can use any thread you like. I'm just saying that I really like Aurifil. And then let's see, so I used the 2600 Aurifil. Oh, and I used an 8012 Microtex needle. That's kind of the standard I use for piecing. Alrighty, guys, you ready to see our Tulip ladyfinger block? I'll trim those little threads off a little bit, but isn't that sweet? I love that. With this kind of a check in here, this it kind of looks like this would be so cute as a big blanket for a picnic, I think, right? But I just thought that was really sweet. And I still have to figure out maybe if there is truly a ladyfinger. I know there's a ladyfinger flower. It kind of looks a little bit like a tulip. So maybe that's where they got the idea. But this is a pretty quick and easy block to do. If you make a block, or if you make a bunch of them and turn them into a quilt, or if you add a block into a scrappy quilt that you're already making, please post those photos over at Sew in Common, SEW in Common, which is on Facebook. That's my Facebook group. I'd love to have you. It's a very safe place to be. I kind of screen who gets in. Not that you won't get in, but we've been hacked recently. And so I just try to make sure. So if it asks you to answer a couple questions, please do that, just so that helps me know that you're not like a bot or a hacker or something, okay? And then I'll let you in. And then just show everybody super sweet, super nice, very helpful. Everybody tries to inspire everybody. So I would love to see what you do with the Tulip ladyfinger quilt block. All right, thanks folks for joining me for this week on Patches and Pieces. I hope to see you next week, where we'll be taking a look at another quilting block. Could be another traditional block. Maybe it'll be something a little more modern. You never know. You got to tune in to find out. Thanks so much for being with me today. Bye, everybody.